There's going to be maybe a little bit more slides than there were in chapter 14, but I think we can move fairly quickly here. It's kind of hard to sum up everything from chapter 15 with this area we called Oceania. This really would include Australia too, but it's really all those islands that are located near Australia and New Zealand. So there's a lot of them. And like this map, we're not even actually going to do a map in class. We may do a digital map to take a look at that. One thing that almost all these places have in common is they are just kind of breathtakingly gorgeous. Really, really pretty. French Polynesia, I used to have a poster that was like hanging up in my bedroom, I think, or maybe it was in college. And it's just, I mean, crystal clear blue water, white sandy beaches, palm trees, not incredibly populated. So a lot of these places are just absolutely gorgeous. You probably heard of Fiji before. There's American Samoa. That's a U.S. territory. That's right below Samoa. Not really any way related to the Girl Scout cookie. I'm not sure exactly how Girl Scouts cookies started calling themselves Samoas, but yeah. So there's a lot of stuff here in this area. We do have the Mariana Islands up here. I may have deleted my slide that I was going to show you, but that's where the Mariana Trench is, the deepest place in the ocean, which is so deep that you could actually put Mount Everest in it and it would not stick out the top. So the ocean is deeper than Mount Everest is tall. Pretty fascinating. There you can kind of see that crystal clear blue water. And we're talking about, this is a massive area covering 3.3 million square miles. There are 10,000 islands. Now, not all these islands are the same size. Some are really, really small. Some are big. So there are, what they call deserted islands that like no one really lives on. That really would not be able to support life. And then some of them have highways and, all kinds of stuff. So we can kind of break some of this into these various areas with this term Nesia at the end. So we have like Micronesia up here, would include other things besides the Federated States of Micronesia. We also have Marshall Islands. We have Polynesia and we have Melanesia. So kind of have different classifications of these different areas where they're located. I included this slide just so you can kind of get an idea of how some people live, thatched roofs. This is as much as tourism is a big part of this area, some people also live in some poverty. It does mention here too that Guam and American Samoa are both U.S. territories. Guam is where there is a U.S. Base there. I don't know, Navy maybe. It is located at Guam. Kind of again, just showing you elevations. This isn't really that important to take a look at there. There are several different types of islands. There are kind of like low islands and there are high islands. And we'll get into this a little bit more in class, like what's causing them to be that. And I think both are connected with volcanic activity. Hawaii, for example, is an example of high islands. So there's a lot of elevation in Hawaii. It's mountainous and the mountains look fairly dramatic there because the ocean is at sea level and these mountains can be, thousands of feet tall. So it just is a very sharp and abrupt. You can kind of see that in this picture here. So elevation, some of them, there are these high islands. There's another good picture. You can kind of see there's the ocean. And then you can see how high those islands go up. So Tahiti would be another example of a high island besides Hawaii. There are also low islands, and they get the name because they are much lower, very flat. An atoll is a type of low island that you'll see here in a minute. And this is going to show up a little bit later on. I want you to think about if this water level over here would raise, what would happen, right? Like it would only have to raise maybe a couple of feet, and that road would be completely buried underneath water. And so there is a little bit of a risk in the years to come that some of these low islands may get buried underneath water and then they become uninhabited. And we'll kind of explain what's causing that here in a bit. There is an aerial view of an atoll. I find atolls really, really interesting. There would have been a volcano that would have formed in the middle here. That volcano would have erupted, and then coral forms around the volcano. And then eventually the volcano sinks from its like own weight in the ocean, I believe. And so there still may be some kind of like a cinder cone or something underneath the ocean, but the coral forms on the outside, the coral dies over time, sand deposits on it, which then eventually trees can develop. So it's just, I had no idea that this was a thing. Like growing up, I didn't know an atoll was a thing, but it's like completely like land that made itself through a volcanic eruption and just the process over time. Now, it would have taken a long time for these to form, thousands of years. Like this is not a fast thing. So you're not going to see like an atoll form within your lifetime. It would be a fairly slow moving thing. So to just kind of wrap up this, the key facts for this lesson 1, as I said, there's about 10,000 islands. We can kind of break these into those areas of Melanesia, Polynesia, and Micronesia. Some of those belong to the United States, such as Guam and American Samoa. New Guinea is the largest island in Oceania. There are a couple different types of islands, being low islands and high islands. A lagoon is a shallow body of water separated by a larger body of water by an exposed shoal, reef, or inland. So the inside of an atoll is what we would call the lagoon. Coastal lagoons are most common type of lagoon. Most islands in Oceania have warm, humid, tropical climates. Not too surprising, right? When you think of places like Fiji, you think of tropical weather. There is an effect called El Nino that has to do with, and it doesn't happen every year. There's also a La Nina that happens, and it's both like weather patterns that cause a change. So El Nino in Papua New Guinea leads to droughts. Papua New Guinea does also have quite a few resources of gold, copper, fish, and natural gas. A lot of that is just because it is a larger country, so there's more resources present. Just a little bit about the history. We're not going to go into a lot of detail about this. One thing, we're going to watch some clips from Moana in class. We can see these ships right here. So one of the things that was done was called wayfinding. You can see that term right there. This is not a canoe that like you would have. It's kind of meant for the ocean. This side over here is meant to keep that more balanced. So they would travel from island to island. So kind of eventually kind of moving and discovering new territories. That's kind of how all the items came to be settled. You've probably heard of these before. They're called the Rapa Nui, and they are located on Easter Island. If you've seen Night at the Museum, one of the statues, things come to life in that movie, and the statue always says, "Dum dum, you give me gum gum." So that is kind of referencing these statues on Easter Island. Sometimes they're called the Moai as well, Moai. And they're kind of fascinating. They don't exactly know why they're there. The native people that built them are no longer there, but kind of fascinating that they found these statues all over this island in the Pacific. Eventually, Europeans start to arrive on these islands, trying to use it for its resources. And obviously, that's going to lead to warfare to some degree. Christianity was brought, so we see a picture of a church here. Another thing that's kind of important, we talk about Japan in World War II. All of those little red marks there are showing like different battles that took place in the Pacific during World War II. So as Japan was trying to expand their territory, these were a place of conflict. One of the probably the most important ones would be over here at Midway. Guadalcanal would be another fairly significant one there. And then some of these territories belong to Iwo Jima and Okinawa are both areas that belonged to Japan at the time. So we don't really, I would classify them as part of Japan, not really a part of this area of Oceania, but that's, again, fairly close. And you can see where those conflicts were taking place. So to kind of wrap up this, I know that was a little bit faster. People have been here since about 1500 BC. They came from Southwest Asia. They traveled through wayfinding, which is where you navigate from the sun and the stars. And as I said, you'll see that in Moana. Easter Island is famous for these statues. Colonists eventually came around 1600, and this was kind of why they've been after certain things like in Central America as well. So a lot of it's going to be, sugar, coffee, tobacco, cacao, probably to some degree, which is made into chocolate. So then eventually Christian missionaries come as well. Several of the islands were sites of battles in World War II. There's a great amount of diversity in these islands. There are some similarities like tattooing, wood carving, and storytelling are all kind of components of that. We've already watched a video that showed tapping, the certain type of tattooing that's done in Hawaii, but I think other islands practice that as well. We saw in New Zealand, the Maori people have facial tattoos. So like you can just kind of see the connection because these people kind of all kind of came from those same areas over time, even though today their cultures are very different. As we see, there's some people over here in the water snorkeling. Like tourism is really, really big, and without it, there would be an economic collapse. So people go there for vacations. You know, going to Fiji would be kind of like probably more like a once in a lifetime type of thing. You know, it's not like going to Florida. Really, even Hawaii is kind of like out of the budget of a lot of people. So Fiji is kind of one of those places really far away, but really, really beautiful. So start saving now, right? Many people on the islands less developed and depend on money from family members living overseas. I don't know if you've seen this term yet this year. It's called remittances. It's kind of hard to really picture this. Like, why would people just send money back? But that happens in a lot of countries. Go on a cruise ship, go to Disney World, look at the name tags of people, right? They are not all from the United States. They're from all over the place, and they can make better wages doing those things. And so to help support their families, they will send that money back home. At least some of it. Obviously, they need to have some of it to for their own, survival here wherever they're living. I said this earlier. American Samoa is a territory of the United States. I'm going to skip over that slide, I think, because U.S. military is out in these bases, like in Guam. You might see aircraft carriers and other things out in the ocean. Skip that too. One of the biggest environmental issues, and I kind of talked about this already, is global warming, climate change. And it's really kind of what's happening at the poles. So areas that have a lot of ice, so North Pole, South Pole, right? As the temperatures begin to warm, that ice melts and falls into the ocean. Well, that's going to, over time, raise the entire level of the ocean. And it may only be raising inches every year. But like I said, some of these low islands don't really have any elevation to them. So there have been islands already, I believe, in the world that have become buried due to the water level rising in the ocean. Kind of a really interesting issue that's happening further away, but it's also happening right here. So just the level of the ocean raising over time. There's also a lot of pollution. There is an area that we might talk about in class called the Pacific Garbage Patch, and it has to do with like ocean currents that are all putting trash in the same kind of relative area. And it's like a soup of trash. It's really gross. Lots of plastic pieces. Fish eat it thinking it's, food, and it's not. So there's definitely some issues going on with pollution in the waters. Usually the stuff that we throw out, if we're not careful, can make it into our waterways because it all leads to the same place. We've talked a lot about the Great Barrier Reef, and so obviously, there is some issues with that, commercial fishing operations. So I kept this section a little bit shorter. This is kind of interesting too. Smaller independent islands have to import most of their things. Think about Hawaii, right? Like Hawaii has a lot of tourism, but they can't produce all their own stuff just because they're islands. So a lot of things get sent there. My guess is gas prices in Hawaii are higher than they are here in Indiana. Food cost is going to be higher. Some of that has to do with just getting all those materials there. So these islands have to import so much stuff. That's why they have to have that tourism, because they don't really have things that they can export. They're exporting tourism and that kind of entertainment aspect. So they need that for their economic stability. Obviously, that doesn't happen. It could create economic collapse. Money is often sent overseas to people back home to provide a remittance for them so they have money. And then I named all these territories that belong to the U.S. I guess I should say a U.S. territory is different than a U.S. state. They are represented in Congress, but they cannot vote. So like Puerto Rico is a good example of this. Some people think that Puerto Rico will become our 51st state. They have representatives that meet in Washington, D.C. They can advise Congress, but they are not allowed to vote. So that's kind of one of the distinctions between a territory and a state. Obviously, there would be some governmental structures there in place at the local level. There are natural disasters. We're kind of in the ring of fire, so there would be tsunamis, and there could be earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, those types of things. And we already talked about some of those environmental issues. So that's going to do it for all three of those lessons. This may have been a little bit longer than I intended, but get your key facts and your note sheets filled in, and that will do it for your final Edpuzzle of the year. Thanks for watching.